It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast, presented, of course, by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. Most of you know that. Perhaps you listen or watch youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, the Ross Tucker football podcast. We got Greg Cosell, the civilian GOAT, coming on today. Perhaps the Even Money Betting podcast, College Draft podcast, where we make some picks against the spread and talk about some of the top prospects. All kinds of shows for you, including the Fantasy Feast, the show that's so nice. We do it twice a week during the season to give you 25 to 27 minute digestible episodes for your commute, your workout, whatever. The star of the show is John Daigle. He is fantastic at @NotJDaigle. If you're not following him, how much do you really like fantasy? I mean, you got to follow John. And quite frankly, you should go to establishtherun.com and use the code FEAST so that you get the discount on the incredible info that John and Evan Silva and Adam Levitan and the whole crew over at ETR provide each and every week. We did 7 games in episode 1, so we start episode 2 with the Niners and the Bucks. I mean, is it really happening? Are we really going to get Christian McCaffrey's debut this week, John?
We may get the entire gang back together. The 49ers offense is about to become the same unit that we saw last year. No Brandon Ayuk, of course, but Jawan Jennings, who, remember, spiked the Rams with a 40% target share earlier this year as a top 2 wide receiver that week. He's practicing out of the team's bye. It's not just that Deebo Samuel, last time we saw him without Brandon Ayuk that first game before their bye, a 28% target share, now coming back at full strength as well. George Kittle still leading all tight ends in multi-touchdown games this year. But yes, Christian McCaffrey sounds as if he's going to return. And the first game back will be touch and go. If you learn from your mistakes with Puka Nacua in his first game back, the moral of the story in fantasy is that ceiling elite players like that, you start them. Don't even question it. Don't live to regret your life with those kind of players on your bench. Start him and figure it out the rest of the way. But we have seen a propensity historically with Kyle Shanahan that when players, specifically running backs, come back injured, that he will then give them the keys to the car and let them decide their own fate. I think that's what probably happens in this game. Again, it's a more nuanced situation given that McCaffrey's Achilles tendonitis was so serious, but I do think we could get 15-plus touches from McCaffrey in his first game back. More importantly, it's also a great game for Deebo, Jennings, and the team's passing offense. The Bucs are running zone coverage in over 80% of their snaps this year under Todd Bowles, and only Lamar Jackson and Purdy have averaged over 10 yards per attempt against zone coverage. So it's just the perfect spot and the perfect storm for this 49ers offense coming off extended rest against a Bucs defense that is doing the opposite and having a short rest. It seems like this may get out of hand quickly for Tampa Bay, especially without Mike Evans. Chris Godwin will wait on their explosive slot wide receiver Jalen McMillan, but really Sterling Shepard, although he did pop for a season-high target share on Monday night, it's just not the same formula. And their only option they trust right now through the air is Cade Otton, who's been incredible too, admittedly. His last 3 games, Cade Otton box scores 8 catches for 100 yards, 9 for 81 and 2 touchdowns. And then we saw this past week, 8 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown, 31 targets in that time. So unlike the Bucs backfield, which is a complete mess right now, Sean Tucker 3 weeks ago finished as the overall RB1 on the year, and since then has barely reached 11 touches in that time behind Rashad White and Bucky Irving. Complete 3-headed mess, but Cade Otton is the one who continues getting hammered targets.
Yeah, Cade Otton. Boy, thank goodness they have him. Because Baker's been looking, and Baker's throwing the ball to receivers I never even heard of. Like the guy scored a touchdown, Ryan Miller.
That's the issue. Ryan Miller, Raheem Jarrett led them in routes run behind the scenes as well. Whereas Cade Otton, the interesting thing is that they also changed up his usage. They used him more like Rashee Rice, where they got him in motion. They got him closer to the line of scrimmage already, like at full speed when he caught the ball to make sure he could just get upfield. So they know Cade Otton right now is the player they have to get the ball to.
Let's talk about one of the best games of the day. 6-2 Steelers, 7-2 Commanders.
I'm excited, and I don't even know if it will live up to the fantasy hype. Washington hasn't given us a reason to think they'll fail yet. But for Russell Wilson and the Steelers passing offense, who did add Mike Williams before the trade deadline, the perfect receiver to fit with Russell Wilson, averaging a 15-yard depth of target because he earns his targets downfield, and he has a 71% contested catch rate, so we know on those Russell Wilson moonshots, you just need a guy who's not scared to go up and get it and can come down with it successfully. That's Mike Williams in a vacuum. So I thought it was a very good trade, but it's really what Washington's defense under Dan Quinn has become over the past month. And we hinted at this last week for the Commanders, but now for Russ, the Commanders have generated the league's fourth highest pressure rate since week 5, and Russell Wilson, it's only a 2-game sample, so we don't know just yet, but Russell Wilson under pressure this year has completed just 35% of his passes. Only Anthony Richardson has completed a lower rate of passes under pressure than Wilson so far through his 2 starts. So if Washington can successfully get there, this game may be a little bit tougher than the Steelers than perceived. I will say that Washington, when they give it up through the air, it does go deep. On their 8 completions allowed over 20 yards deep this year, 5 touchdowns already. And again, that's where Russell Wilson wants to throw. He's throwing it 20 yards downfield at the league's 3rd highest rate. So it's going to be volatile, but George Pickens, I still think, is the option to trust here for the Steelers. On the other side of the ball, everyone knows. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, throw whatever the hell you want at them and they'll come out alive. Like, they're totally fine in fantasy. But what's happening is that they quietly have a wide receiver 2 emerging. Because Noah Brown, the veteran that the Texans probably wish they had back from this offseason right now, has lapped their rookie, Luke McCaffrey, and now has run a route on 65% of his dropbacks and has recorded 17.5% of Jaden Daniels' targets since he returned from injury, Noah Brown, in week 6. Even if you look at just like typical target shares, not just target numbers, Terry McLaurin over the last month has peaked at a 24% target share at any point. Noah Brown, even last week, saw 31.5% of Jaden Daniels' targets. I think Jaden Daniels is learning to trust Noah Brown, and it's giving Cliff Kingsbury's offense a second option to trust over the top of Zach Ertz, the shallow guy who just helps move the chains. So I like picking up Noah Brown in fantasy ahead of this week as well.
All right, let's move on, and let's get to the Titans and the Chargers. How about the Chargers? I mean, I don't know what the deal was with the Browns and those dropped coverages, John, but 2 brutal dropped coverages enabled Herbert to get those big touchdowns down the field. Curious what you're looking for in this matchup.
Yeah, no Denzel Ward and Juan Thornhill miscommunicating constantly this week, so it could be a tougher go. The Titans are limiting opposing quarterbacks to a league-low yards per attempt, but I also think that's based on the schedule. The easier schedule the Titans have played so far, whereas right now Justin Herbert is proving he's matchup proof for fantasy. That first month of the season before the Chargers bye, it was a run-heavy offense that depended on their defense, and Justin Herbert was clearly still hampered by his low ankle sprain he suffered during the preseason. But now, 4 games out of their bye, they're averaging 33 pass attempts per week compared to 22 before the bye. And then really they've become an offense that builds the lead through Justin Herbert in the passing game and then plays tight defense and leans on their running game to ice it the rest of the way. As you saw against the Browns even, Herbert, 250 of his 282 passing yards did come in the first half. And that was the game they finally got Quentin Johnston back, their explosive wide receiver who they're using correctly as he was used in TCU as a bigger version of Brandon Ayuk. Someone you want to get the ball to on crossing routes and let him use his speed and yards after the catch ability to then turn himself upfield. That's how Jim Harbaugh has unlocked Quentin Johnston, who has 4 receiving touchdowns this year. So Quentin Johnston, Ladd McConkey, still players I'm trusting in this matchup. Although, again, on paper, it does seem like it's deceiving. I'm skeptical of that. Chargers also over touchdown favorites in this game, 7.5 points the last I looked. So we're expecting them to have success here. And for the Titans, that's kind of the issue because without DeAndre Hopkins the last 2 games, we're not sure if Will Levis will be back under center for Mason Rudolph in this one. But Calvin Ridley has at least seen the targets without Hopkins, unsurprisingly. His last 2 games, 39% and 30% target shares. Just getting peppered everything he wants in 2 games in a post-DeAndre Hopkins life. So that's really, honestly, like the only direction to go here for Tennessee's offense, who just continues to struggle. And again, against Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, this defense that's roaring right now, I'm very worried about Tennessee.
I can see that. You made a good case. What about, as we get to some more of these late games, how about the Jets and the Arizona Cardinals, who keep finding a way to win with different guys, DeMercado or McBride? Curious about your thoughts on that one.
The Cardinals offense is starting to figure out their identity. We always knew that engine ran through James Conner, and whenever they have a lead or in a competitive game script, that's who they don't mind going to. We did get a 300-yard performance from Kyler Murray through the air a couple weeks ago against the Dolphins. The thing for fantasy is why people keep getting frustrated is that, one, Drew Petzing, offensive coordinator for Arizona, has shown us that he is not scared to go away from Kyler in situations where the Cardinals defense can dominate and get to the quarterback. And so a lot like Lamar Jackson for fantasy last year, where he was frustrating because at times, and I guess somewhat like the Lions players this year, where they're so good that the foot isn't kept on the gas for the entire time, and thus these players don't get there for fantasy. That's kind of what we're seeing for Kyler Murray, who's been hit or miss, but it's been in games where the Cardinals dominate, and then they just lean on the running game. We even saw DeMercado pop up. Yes, that was probably Matt Eberflus's fault for calling a pass rush play with only 12 seconds left in the first half on a running back draw. Really odd for a defensive-minded head coach. But DeMercado still got there with over 50 yards and a touchdown. Trey Benson comes in for James Conner last week, who did suffer a concussion in game, cleared out from protocol after that. But that's why Trey Benson was put in on the goal line, had pop too. Looked great, but scored the goal line touchdown. But that's the issue for the Cardinals right now. I do think what Aaron Rodgers and the Jets have shown us through the air is enough to where this game could be competitive. Even against the Jets defense, like you look at their last 2 matchups, and they played Jacoby Brissett and CJ Stroud without Nico Collins, which we'll get to that in a minute. It's a whole other issue right now. But those are not 2 matchups we fear. Whereas the Jets before that, Russell Wilson averaged over 9 yards per attempt. Josh Allen averaged over 8.5 yards per attempt. So it's a volatile game for Kyler Murray, but one I still want to start him in, especially since even in their struggles, Drake May, 46 rushing yards, CJ Stroud, 59 rushing yards last week. That's how Kyler can get there and provide a higher floor in fantasy. So I'm still trusting Kyler in this game. And on the other side of the ball, the rapport is growing for Aaron Rodgers in the passing attack. Devontae Adams now, his target share has increased in all 3 games. He's been there with Rodgers in the Jets. Garrett Wilson still peaking, 2 touchdown performance the last time we saw. And then they continue to lean on Breece Hall. We weren't sure if they were going to start mixing in Braylon Allen. But it turns out a couple weeks ago when Allen handled 12 touches to Breece Hall 17 in Week 8, that was only because the Jets had a short turnaround on Thursday night. In the other 3 games under interim head coach Jeff Ulbrich, Breece Hall has out-touched Allen 58-10. Allen they don't even use, and they lean on Breece Hall. So for fantasy, especially ahead of this game, Hall is someone I actually want to buy low on before everyone catches on that he is the Jets' every touch running back.
Love it. I also love Labatt Blue Light. And when I get back from Hawaii, yes, I'm going to Hawaii for UNLV at Hawaii. I will get home. I'll be watching the Eagles and the Cowboys, and I'll be drinking Labatt Blue Lights with my family, living life to the power of we. Enjoying it responsibly, of course. Delicious beer made by Labatt USA in Buffalo, New York. Let's talk Eagles and Cowboys. There's some interesting injury stuff here. Looks like Dak is out, and A.J. Brown's status a little bit up in the air as we record here, John.
Supposedly, A.J. Brown day-to-day with that knee injury. I will say, if you include this past week, we've now seen 3 starts for Devonta Smith without A.J. Brown this year under offensive coordinator Kellen Moore. And as those 3 starts, Devonta Smith has seen 34.5%, 27.5%, and 26% of the team's targets. That's what's fun about Philly's offense for fantasy. They don't really stretch it out. If an elite player is injured, they just condense it further. And so in this game, I expect it to be entirely made out of Jalen Hurts, still just humming along after the bye. Has been incredible these last 4 weeks. Devonta Smith and Saquon Barkley, who obviously caught the world's attention with his athletic backwards hurdle. Just amazing what he's doing so far. So those are the 3 guys you trust in Philly. You don't need to stretch yourself thin with Jahan Dotson or Grant Calcaterra if A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert are out. And the thing is, I don't know how much pushback they receive from, you talked about A.J. Brown's injury. Let's get to the Cowboys' injuries because, yes, they could be getting Micah Parsons back this game, but what's left when Micah Parsons comes back doesn't really scare you, honestly. Cooper Rush was re-signed to a long-term deal, but it's not like the peripherals behind the scenes were exciting. He went 4-1 off the bench because the team as a whole played amazing in 2022 in his 5 starts. But around those wins, he completed just 58% of his passes, 6.6 yards per attempt, failed to reach 240 passing yards in any game. I will say in those 5 starts in 2022, he did hammer CeeDee Lamb for a 34% target share, but also CeeDee Lamb may not play this game. And behind CeeDee Lamb, that's where the Cowboys have not only struggled like last week, that's where they have had issues finding anyone to step up all year long. Jalen Tolbert got there in garbage time. He led the team in routes run against the Falcons last week. Maybe that's the player you plug in here because he's just going to be out there by necessity. But Jonathan Mingo, who knows if he'll do anything in Dallas, but it's also too short of a turnaround to trust him to learn the team's playbook, especially if he's trying to be the team's second wide receiver without CeeDee Lamb. And Rico Dowdle, although he looked amazing against the Falcons, and honestly the last 2 games, they've given him any run. He has been incredible around the illness he suffered in that Sunday night game where Dalvin Cook stepped in instead. But also it's a situation where they continue getting Dalvin Cook, Hunter Lipke, their fullback, and then we'll see what happens to Ezekiel Elliott. But they still use all of their running backs and limit Rico Dowdle's ceiling. So Dowdle can be an RB2 or 3 in this game, if only for his receiving role among Dallas's backfield. But right now, honestly, the Cowboys are just one of the ugliest situations, not only for fantasy, but in all of football.
Yeah,
it's a mess.
Well, it is a mess, but also, they didn't really do anything in the offseason to get better. So
No.
you shouldn't really be surprised when you get worse. Everybody else is at least trying to do things to get better. If you aren't doing anything to get better, you're getting worse necessarily. And that's exactly what happened with the Cowboys.
I could spend an hour on this, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. Like I could do an entire different show on the Cowboys' demise. But I think you just look at the trade deadline to summarize it all up. The fact that, remember, a few years ago, you traded Amari Cooper for a 5th-round pick, who the Bills then traded years after, the only card that's ever appreciated in our lifetime, traded for a 3rd-round pick this year, and then the Cowboys go out and send a 4th-round pick for Jonathan Mingo. It's like, that's the business. That's what the Cowboys do business-wise, and it's not winning. It's not a winning formula.
That is funny. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Now, listen, money's always part of the factor in those moves, right?
Of course.
Amari was getting $20 million a year back then. He's making like the minimum this year, so that is certainly a factor. But it's still, for the people that don't follow the money part of it closely enough, that will be surprised. I mean, they traded a 4th-round pick for Trey Lance. They traded a 4th-round pick for Mingo. They gave up a very good player for less than a 4th-round pick in Amari Cooper. And Trey Lance isn't even playing when Dak's hurt.
And Bucky Irving and Braylon Allen went in that 4th round, among many other running backs, as the Cowboys continue to complain and try to find answers among their backfield. So, yes, it's all everything's coming back to so right now. It's not good.
Hey, let's talk Lions-Texans. The Texans, I was studying them a little bit. They don't look good, man. I mean, they can't pick up a blitz. They can't protect Stroud. He looks like he's a little shell-shocked. Maybe no Nico's been an impact. Talk to me about the Texans first and the Lions.
The Texans are an absolute mess as well. As we get to the winter months and more players get injured and teams are just trying to solve the problems that are getting sent at them, I find myself using the term mess on this show more often. But the Texans right now are a mess. And now in their last 4 games without Nico Collins, who will once again be out in this one, it sounded as if he was trending towards playing. I hope it wasn't a setback, because that's the one key piece that CJ Stroud has to have on the field right now. Also, without Stephon Diggs after he tore his ACL, you stand back and you see Stroud in his last 4 games, 55% completion rate, 6.3 yards per attempt, 16 sacks, and 3 fumbles. It's a mess for the Texans' passing offense at this time. So much so that, yes, you can start Stroud as a low-end QB1, but honestly, you're probably better off picking up Justin Herbert or someone like that off the waiver wire, because I'm worried about this game, even in being indoors, even against undoubtedly getting pushback from the Lions offense. I just don't think the Texans have the firepower to keep up with Detroit. Joe Mixon even has 100 yards from scrimmage in every single game he's completed this year, all 5. But even then, the Lions defense is not an exciting one you want to run your running backs at, as they've shown us historically. So I am worried about Houston's offense in this game. Whereas the Lions, what's happening for fantasy is that, like I talked about with Lamar Jackson last year, and Kyler Murray this season, it's that they're just too good. Like, they build big leads. The ball is spread out because Ben Johnson does not care about our fantasy teams. He cares about winning, and that's exactly what the Lions are doing. And thus, outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown, really the ball gets spread out everywhere else, and their identity does run through David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, who also, frustratingly for fantasy, you can't really figure out the game plan when each one is used, because they're both so good at their roles. And so Montgomery usually begins the game as the team's hammer to establish physicality. And then after that, Jahmyr Gibbs still may pop off a 70-yard touchdown, as he did last week. So the Lions, it just spread out. It goes everywhere. You hope that a team can punch back against them. That's what we want for fantasy. But again, I don't think the Texans do that in this game. So I'll still trust Amon-Ra. I'll still play Sam Laporta, although I think everyone should be trying to trade him. Remember, double-digit target share in both games the past 2 weeks without Jameson Williams, but we are getting Jameson Williams back for this one. So Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, start them all, but Texans infrastructure, yes, we are concerned about right now.
Hey, so this Smirnoff contest is ending soon. I've been telling you guys about it the last couple weeks. It's WeDoGameDays.com. It ends November 15th. They're giving fans in select areas of the country a chance to win the ultimate game day experience, tickets, sideline passes, much more. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please not share with anyone in a legal drinking age. No purchase necessary. 21 plus and 11/15/24. See rules at website for participating area and other important details. Sponsored by Diageo Americas Incorporated, New York, New York. Here's the deal. There's no I in football. It's a we thing. You experience it together. Good drinks, good folks. That's my friends at Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka, an official vodka partner of the NFL. WeDoGameDays.com. WeDoGameDays.com. Let's talk Monday Night Football. Dolphins, Game 3 with Tua back against the Rams.
So for the Rams, the last 2 games, which is what we're weighing the most, since that's when they've gotten Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back, they've averaged 5.4 and 5.8 yards per play. They are back as the explosive offense that led them into the wild card, and outside of poor in-game coaching decisions, they should have won that game against the Lions last year. But they're exciting through the air, and they're also exciting not just because of those 2 guys everyone's starting weekly in Cooper Kupp and Nacua, but because Demarcus Robinson continues to emerge as their confident wide receiver 3. We now have a 9-game sample going back to last year when Robinson overthrew Tutu Atwell and 11 personnel and is used as the Rams' third wide receiver. And in those 9 games, he's averaged 15 fantasy points, which is the wide receiver 14 in points per game this year, and a team-high 11 end zone targets. Because similar to how, I think I've talked about this in the past too, similar to how Sean McVay used Odell Beckham during the Rams Super Bowl run as a big-bodied receiver to trust inside the red zone, that's how they use Demarcus Robinson as a touchdown machine, which is why he has 4 touchdowns the last 2 weeks. So I think Robinson is still a flex-worthy play. And what's also a tad intimidating for the Dolphins offense, although we've seen now Devon Achane in his 4 games with Tua this year is averaging the most fantasy points of any running back. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane is the RB1 whenever Tua has been on the field this season. The concern for the Dolphins offense is that the Rams defense has really turned a corner and making changes, getting players back healthy since their bye. Even last week in a game where we thought Jordan Love, who was injured, I get it, could get there. It was raining, but 7 yards per attempt, 1 interception. Jared Verse pops up constantly, their explosive rookie edge on film, because the Rams are also creating pressure now and getting these coverage guys back healthy and just allowing them to stick to wide receivers for a longer time. So I'm trusting Tyreek Hill, but I do think it's a concerning matchup for Tua and Jalen Waddle. Waddle, who frustratingly still hasn't recorded over 50 receiving yards since the season opener.
Check him out on social media at @NotJDaigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.